Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world.
So here we are with two issues, and I will tell you in my life I've been greatly blessed in many positive ways, and also in two, I guess it's positive. I mean, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and moved back there to be with my parents in the mid-'80s, and wondered why the hell I was there in the first place. People ask me why I live in Columbus. I say, well, I love the mountains and I love the ocean. And they say, well, they're neither here. And I say, well, I was misinformed. What movie was that? Who knows? Casablanca. You get a free book. Congratulations. You know, he says, why'd you come to Casablanca? Well, the waters, right? And we're learning here. Well, I was misinformed. So anyway, so I always wondered what the hell I was doing in Columbus, Ohio. And then this past, in 2004, we saw it happen. I mean, we really saw it happen. We saw the theft of a presidential election. And somebody asked me before, did John win? John Kerry won Ohio by about 250,000 votes. Between 200 and 250,000 votes. And he won the presidential election overall, the popular vote, we think by somewhere between 1.5 million and 3 million votes. And there's absolutely no, I mean, you know, I grew up in this town. I'm a historian. Bob is a political scientist, which means that I sit there and spout off and he gives the numbers. And we saw them do it, and we still are finding ways that they stole this election. I mean, and what they did was 3 or 4 phased, but it was clearly very, very carefully planned. We believe that they planned at the beginning. The planning to steal the 2004 election began right after they stole the 2000 election, basically, because they knew they weren't going to win again, or they took, you know, nothing. Oh, by the way, I totally forgot, Jerry Mander's here too. He was mentioned earlier, and Jerry is responsible for some of this stuff. I saw the white hair, you know, spouting out there. This was an absolute work of genius, what they did in 2004. It's almost frightening. Well, it is frightening, because they didn't rely, in Florida they were limited to 5 or 6 different things that they could do, right? They prevented people from voting, they screwed up the voting machines, they played with the electronic vote count, they did the hanging chads, and, you know, and a few other things, about 5 or 6 things that they did to steal the 2000 election. Come 2004, we have this little book, we identify about 180 different things they did in terms of rigging the vote count. And it starts at the beginning. They prevented people from registering. They lost people's registrations. The Secretary of State of Ohio, J. Kenneth Blackwell, announced that voter registration cards had to be on an 80-pound paper weight. It came as a total surprise to every election board in the state. My favorite moment is that a team from the Columbus Dispatch, a conservative right-wing paper in Columbus, went into the Secretary of State's office and got registration forms from his office that were on 60-pound weight. So if you went to the Secretary of State's office, you took a form, you registered, it was not legal under this directive. I mean, it's astounding what they did. I got involved directly. I mean, I was getting involved anyway, but I've lived in the same house and voted in the same precinct for 20 years. I went downtown because I wanted to get an absentee ballot. I filled out the form. 3 days later, I got a notice in the mail that I was not going to get an absentee ballot because they had the wrong address on my form. But it came to the right address. And I called him up, and the guy says, oh yeah, we've been getting hundreds of calls. Now what does that tell you? You know, what are they doing? It took me 4 calls, and finally the magic words, I'm with the media, I got my ballot. But as a result of that, I'm a plaintiff in a lawsuit, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So they failed to send out absentee ballots. People would show up at the polls to get their ballots, and they had been removed from the voter list. And we discovered before the election that 300,000 people had been removed from the voter rolls in Ohio prior to the 2004 election. 300,000 people. 5.4 million votes were officially counted. So that's a very substantial percentage. The official margin between Bush and Kerry was 118,000 or thereabouts. 300,000 people in, guess where they were? They're all in the urban areas. Cleveland, Toledo, and Cincinnati. And after the election, they removed another 170,000 in Columbus, just for the hell of it. But they did, and we didn't know about it. We didn't know about the 170 in Cuyahoga County. We found out about Toledo and Cincinnati before the election. No explanation except that these people had not voted in the prior two presidential elections, allegedly, and people were not removed in the rural areas. It was only in the urban areas that people were removed. 300,000 people, many of whom showed up to vote the day of the and no notification. No one was notified that they were removed from the ballots. They also, with the blessings of the Secretary of State, various election boards around the state sent out 35,000 letters to ex-felons and some people who weren't ex-felons, told them they had lost their right to vote because they had been convicted of a felony. Which in many cases I said wasn't the truth, but the amazing thing is that there is no law in the state of Ohio that says ex-felons can't vote. It was completely fabricated by the Secretary of State's office and completely illegal, and no one was ever prosecuted. This is called caging. Another thing they did, which, by the way, these 8 federal prosecutors who were fired were involved in this caging activity, and some of them refused to do it. Caging is what you do is you take a letter, you send it to a registered voter. If the letter comes back that it can't be received, you remove that person from the ballot, from the registration list. They did this to tens of thousands of people in Ohio, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people throughout the country, and now they're trying to do it again. And basically it's a fraud. It's actually illegal. A very large number of the people whose letters were returned are, guess where? In Iraq. These people were in the military, and so they've stopped their mail. And it bounces back, and they come back to the country, and they find they've lost their right to vote, along with their health, their savings, their family, and whatever else. So this stuff kept going and going and going. On election day, people I grew up in a neighborhood, and now live a mile away. The neighborhood I grew up in is now black. It took 5 hours to vote in my old neighborhood. Guess how long it took to vote in my white suburban neighborhood? 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I observed the polls in my new neighborhood. You walked in, you voted, you walked out. A mile away, people were standing in the rain for 5 hours. And then, when they got to vote, in many cases they got provisional ballots just for the hell of it. Again, people were playing with the voter rolls. We discovered that tens of thousands of the provisional ballots, people, this makes your blood boil. People were waiting in line for 3 to 5 hours. They get in there, they get a provisional ballot, they leave, and the poll workers drop the ballot in the trash. Hundreds of thousands of them, certainly tens of thousands. This was observed. There are still, in Ohio, 16,000 provisional ballots which have never been counted. What is it now? 2007. They're sitting somewhere, maybe they're sitting somewhere in a warehouse, we hope. They're still preserved. On election day, some of this stuff you can't make up. On election day, people in Youngstown went in on electronic voting machines. They pushed Kerry's name, and Bush lit up.
Oh, yeah.
Can you make that up? Push Kerry's name, Bush lit up. We were attacked by a reporter who said it was only on 18 machines. They actually called up, and some technical worker in the Youngstown said, "Oh, it was only on 18." That's 5,000 votes. Well, actually, it could be as many as 9,000. As many as 500 people were voting on a machine. It happened in Columbus too. If you pushed Kerry and you went down and you voted the rest of the ticket and you went back up, Kerry's name was not lit. And then you had to push it again and push it again and again and again. And that doesn't tell you what went on underneath. Who knows what really went on. We had an instance in Toledo. People showed up to vote at 6 in the morning or 6:30 whenever the poll was open in an elementary school. The machines were locked in the principal's office for security reasons. The principal was called in sick. Nobody had a key to the office. So hundreds of people standing in the rain in Toledo, Ohio, waiting to vote, and the machines are locked up, and people have to go vote. The Democrats go to work. The Democrats did a survey, and God help us with the Democrats. They did a survey, and they found that 3% of the votes in the state, at least, were compromised either by the long lines or by misused ballots. And 2% of the state, which was well over 100,000 voters, right, either stood in line and had to leave, saw the lines and left immediately, or heard about the lines and didn't come to vote. 2% is more of 5.4 million is 108,000 votes, which were not cast. And then another 1% were pitched in the trash, as best we know. Another 50,000 votes at least. Bush's alleged margin of victory was less than 119,000 votes. Then the Democrats, somebody asked me beforehand, well, what's the principal barrier to discovering what happened and publicizing what happened in Ohio? It's the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has fought us tooth and nail. They did do this study. They say 3% of the votes were compromised, 2% by people who couldn't deal with the lines, 1% by votes we know were pitched in the trash. But they said there's no indication whether it favored the Democrats or Republicans. This is the Democrats. This is insane. All the long lines were in the inner city, which were voting 90% for Kerry, literally 90% for Kerry. If you had 108,000 people who didn't vote because of the lines, I guarantee you 90,000 of them were Democrats. But the Democratic Party won't make that connection. When Bob and I were doing this work, we were fought tooth and nail by the Democrats in Ohio. They had a lawyer who worked for the biggest Republican law firm in the state, who was being paid by the Democrats. Somebody explain this to me, please. How could John Kerry concede at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the day after the election, when at 12:20 at night he was 250,000 votes ahead in Ohio? It's impossible that he lost. Let me show you the exit polls. This is the exit poll situation. This was the most scientific, the highest funded, the most technologically advanced set of exit polls ever done in any election in the history of the world. I mean, all the networks pooled their resources along with some of the newspapers, and they paid Edison Matofsky. Warren Matofsky is the inventor of the exit poll, basically, and they put out at least $6 million to do the best possible polling they could do. At 12:20 at night, and God bless Jonathan Simon, he photographed the screen on CNN. Most of the results are in. Now, at 12:20 at night, as you'll recall, there were 11 states in play, right, because of the Electoral College, which I won't go into. You'll be another hour. I teach history, but the roots of the Electoral College are in slavery. And if anybody wants to ask me about it afterwards, please do. But there are 11 states in play, 11 swing states, right? As of 12:20 at night, Bush had carried Colorado and was ahead in Florida by 0.1%. And the 9 other states, swing states, Kerry was winning. Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nevada, New Mexico, and Ohio. It was basically a landslide. He was going to get well over 300 electoral votes, and he was substantially ahead by more than the margin of error in the exit polls at that time, right? Suddenly, after 12:20 at night, the vote counts dry up, especially in Ohio. Now, this is stuff we found out within the past few months. This is not as if we knew all this then. It's still unraveling. In the past few months, we found out. Again, how do you make this up? The Republican Secretary of State of Ohio, J. Kenneth Blackwell, who was also, by coincidence, the chair or the co-chair of the Bush-Cheney campaign in Ohio, slight conflict of interest, didn't seem to bother anybody. He had hired to compile the vote count in Ohio the same servers that were used by the Republican National Committee. The vote counts from Ohio were being sent by email or over the wire to a basement of a server farm in a basement of a bank in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which was simultaneously being used by the Republican National Committee. And the vote counts when these exit polls came out at 12:20 at night, definitively showing a Kerry victory. Suddenly, the vote counts from Ohio stopped coming in, stopped being made public, and 90 minutes later, the trend for Kerry reversed and became a trend for Bush. And now, I won't be a conspiracy theorist here, but just because you have a conspiracy theory doesn't mean there wasn't a conspiracy. The guy who wrote the program to process the Ohio vote count is the same guy who wrote the program to process the website for the Bush-Cheney campaign in the year 2000. Same guy. Same servers as being used by the Republican National Committee, as in being used by the state of Ohio officially to issue the vote counts. And we've seen this now time and again. There is a trend in these elections where you'll go into the early evening and you'll have a vote count. This has happened in a couple of congressional elections we've seen, and the Democrat comes in ahead or even doing unexpectedly well. Suddenly there's glitches in the computer, and a couple hours later, 3 hours later, suddenly the Republican emerges with a victory. This is exactly what happened on the night of after the election of 2004. The trend reversed itself after the issuance of these exit polls. And let me tell you how significant it was. These exit polls, for the first time, had a margin of error of 1%. This is, in Germany, it's 0.1%. But those are the Germans. So here, sorry if I offended anybody, but what can I tell you? So in the United States, and they do, by the way, Germany does elect paper ballots. In Germany and Switzerland, the ballots are counted by hand, and their exit polls are when 0.1% of what comes down. So here in Ohio, rather in the United States, we have 4 purple states. Of the 9 of the 11 states that showed up for Kerry at 12:20 at night, 4 of them wound up in the Bush column and gave him the election. They were Iowa, Nevada, New Mexico, and Ohio. In Iowa, Kerry, the shift from Kerry to Bush was not 0.9%. Or rather, I'm sorry, 2.2%. In Nevada, it was 3.9%. Remember, the margin of error is 1%. In New Mexico, the shift from Kerry to Bush was 3.7%. And in Ohio, with 5.4 million votes counted, the shift from Kerry to Bush, from the exit polls to the official vote count, was 6.7%. 6.7%. That is almost 400,000 votes. 400, that's 10% for Christ. Well, 8%. It's impossible. It did not happen, except in the ether world run by Karl Rove. Now, some people yell about the exit polls, not this, not that. We went into Ukraine. Ukraine had an election just before our election. The incumbent wins, but everybody knows he didn't. The exit polls showed that the challenger won. The nation rose up, and they had a new election, supported by the United States, by the way, and lo and behold, the challenger won. Look what happened in Mexico. The same thing. The right is losing, the left is clearly the winner. Suddenly something goes wrong with the vote counts, and the right emerges with a victory. And it's the same pattern over and over again. Now, since then in Ohio, well, one thing that happened, under federal law, all the ballots from a presidential election are preserved for 22 months. So in September of 2006, the ballots were preserved until September 3rd, actually. So about 2 weeks before that, we went into federal court. And we hit it, thank God we hit it by lottery. We hit a great judge, Algernon Marbley. I did not make that name up. And he ruled, we asked, and I'm a plaintiff and Bob is one of the attorneys, we asked that the ballots be preserved from the 2004 election so that they could be counted. And we asked that they, be brought to a central repository, because there's 88 counties in Ohio and they're all over. And actually, Bob and I took a New York Times reporter, and we were rooting through the boxes, and the guy took my picture, and I was in the New York Times, and the first phone call I got was, "Hey, I didn't know you owned a sport coat." Sorry. So anyway. What can I tell you? So we won our federal lawsuit to preserve all these ballots, and guess what? We sued the Secretary of State for civil rights violations and other things, and this was part of the lawsuit. And we have a Democratic Secretary of State. We had a Democratic sweep in Ohio, in large part because of this. We have a new governor who seems like a decent guy, and an Attorney General and a Secretary of State who seem to be committed to fair elections. And ironically, since we sued the Secretary of State beforehand, we are now technically suing the new Democratic Secretary of State, which is interesting and it's good. In fact, talk about plagiarism, we filed a consent decree, asking for all these reforms. And she has now gone public as if they were hers, and she's, running on these wonderful. It's perfectly fine, Jennifer. Go right ahead. As long as it becomes law, we're happy. So we have just found out this week that of the 88 counties in Ohio, contrary to federal law, 7 of them at least destroyed all their ballots, including the city of Dayton, which is big, and a number of others. And so this is a serious problem. Ironically, by the way, the ballots were preserved in Florida, 2000. There was a big movement in Florida, and they forced Jeb Bush to set up a repository in Tallahassee. And we will get a repository in Columbus, and all the ballots will be there that are left. But we know now that 7 counties destroyed theirs. And so there you go.
What can I ask a question?
Please.
What if you were doing electronic voting? What constitutes a ballot?
Nothing. That's a very good point. Electrons that have disappeared. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're totally opposed to electronic voting machines. You cannot have electronic voting machines and get a reliable vote count or tallying or any of it. Can't be done. Even if the software is transparent, you can get closer. But paper trail is a myth in many cases on these electronic machines. You have to have paper ballots. It's just the way it has to be done. And Bob had a great idea. You should vote.
Paper ballots.
What's that?
Recycled paper ballots.
Yes, on recycled hemp paper, so that if the right candidate wins, you can smoke the ballot afterwards. Sorry, can't resist those things. This should be slapped. But paper ballots. Switzerland, they do it. We actually seen it's very interesting. The Swiss have multicolored, multi-pieced, multi-shaped paper ballots. So if you have different referendum issues, which of course we thankfully have, you just, when someone turns in their ballot, they just sort it by paper, by size, by color, and it works out great. And leave it to the Swiss. So
the Japanese do that too.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
Okay. So and I could go another 2 hours with what they did in Ohio. It's if you're a student of political science, it's a masterpiece. It is vintage Karl Rove. His hands are all over it, and it is a conspiracy. It's not a theory. Let's put it that way. Except that we continue. Well, we found another one. I just was on the phone this morning. Dan Rather, I guess, has a TV show. They're coming to Columbus. They wanted, I have to be filmed because they don't use the lawyers so much. Although I haven't seen my latest haircut. But we discovered, or somebody discovered, it was actually a reporter, I think, discovered. They used different paper in the Scantron. You have these electronic machines, Scantrons. I teach college, and we use them all the time. You run them through. You darken a choice, and then you run them through. Right? You don't punch. We don't want punch cards because they're hanging chads. You run them through, and they're electronically read. Well, one thing that was done in Toledo, in an inner city district, somebody handed out pencils that don't register on the electronic counters. So all the ballots in the whole precinct went through blank. It's amazing. But what we found also now, just in the last week, is that the Scantron ballots that were used in the cities were different paper than the ones used in the rural areas. So that the ones in the cities had a very, very high spoilage rate, as opposed to the ones in the Republican counties. Very, very clear intent here. Did you have something with one?
I just wonder, I'm sitting here and I absolutely believe everything you're saying. It's so horrifying, but I do. But it's hard for me to believe that somebody isn't going to spill it at some point. Do you have any sense that at some point, maybe they're going to have to be on their deathbed or get some fatal disease or something, and they're going to have to say, we did it. We screwed the country and we did this thing. Do you think that will happen? Well,
until somebody sips Karl Rove some really bad acid, I think it's going to be hard to do, because it did not take very many people to do this. It really did not take very many people. You can do a whole election. Well, the Conyers Committee looked at the electronic machines and said, well, it's not just the Conyers, the Government Accountability Office, a number of other, the Carter Baker report. You can drive by an electronic voting machine and change the vote count by Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So how many people does that take? You know, I mean, the Ohio election could have been stolen by 3 people: Roe,
Really?
Blackwell, and somebody else. I mean, it does not take. And many people may have participated in this and that, but that's the beauty of doing it 100 different ways. You know, for example, they in Warren County, a big county, suburban Cincinnati, very Republican. They at 7:30 at night, when the polls closed, they declared a Homeland Security order. No, the FBI doesn't know who did it. The Homeland Security Agency doesn't know who did it. But the Board of Elections declared a Homeland Security order, took all the ballots, all the electronic records, all the poll books, and moved to another warehouse and blocked the public from viewing the vote count. Bush emerged with a huge margin from that county. So, yeah.
Why is the Democratic Party in Ohio not assisting you in unraveling this?
If you know a good shrink, and can send that person to Ohio, I don't understand it. To me, it's inexplicable. As someone who actually can recite the First Amendment to the Constitution, what happened to this country? Yes.
Well, it seems to me that what they're saying is, if they're saying we don't know who it benefited, they're saying that if it benefited the Democrats, it's okay. That's what they're saying. They're saying that what they should be saying is that this is wrong no matter what. This is not our electoral process. This is not our system. This is not democratic. But it sounds like what you're saying is that they don't want to take it on because it could conceivably have benefited the Democrats.
Well, I think there is.
Anyway, so what does it matter?
Well, I think potentially you do have that element. But part of it we think, as best we can tell, and this enters the realm of psychobabble, because who knows, but is that these people are embarrassed that they let this happen. What kind of credibility do they have if they let the Republicans steal not 1 but 2 consecutive presidential elections?
So
Do you think that's why the
Democrats that you're dealing
Don't
with
know.
now,
What's that?
the Democrats that you're dealing with now, are they behaving any differently?
Yes, they are. You have Deborah Bowen here. You have Mark Ritchie in Minnesota. You have Jennifer Bruner in Ohio. They seem to be committed to actually having fair elections, which would be, remarkably nice after this. But
So they're reinstating people then?
What's
Are
that?
they reinstating people to the voter rolls that got deleted before?
I'm not sure they can do that. Jennifer Bruner, I know, is really struggling with trying how to figure this out. We advocate that when you turn 18, you should be automatically registered to vote. You shouldn't have to go anywhere. You have to register with Selective Service. You have to show up and get a driver's license. Wherever you have to show up after the time that you're 18, you're automatically registered to vote. And that should be it. And you should not be removed from the voter rolls without a death certificate. So.
You alluded to the attorneys general who were fired, and what was their role in this?
Well, it's not clear yet. I don't think we're going to know the full story for a while until somebody slips Alberto Gonzalez some really bad acid. I think he had some actually, and that's the problem. We don't know exactly. It does seem to be related. Greg Palast, who I love dearly, by the way, he's both a comic and a journalistic genius, has linked it to this caging, and implied that these people refused to do the bidding of the Bush administration and to do this caging to the extent that they wanted. So we'll see. I don't think we'll know for a while. I mean, I'm astounded we're still finding stuff out. I was blown away to find this out about the paper ballots and to know the other things. And I guess there's more. Well, this thing about the server and the shared computer program, it's astounding. How do you get away with that? Well, and why did we find out? Almost 2 years after more than 2 years after the election. It's astounding.
So what are you expecting now in this coming election?
I think the Republicans' hands are going to be a bit tied, but I wouldn't give up on them. I still don't think it's out of the question they'll nominate Jeb Bush. A lot of people say otherwise, but I don't mean to ruin your evening. Sorry, but I love Rudy Giuliani's personal life. I find it highly entertaining. McCain has really shot himself in the foot. I don't know who they're going to come up with. And there's always Jeb Bush. What's that?
J. Fred Thompson.
Yeah, well, J. Fred Muggs.
He looks good on TV.
They can still steal it. They
Yes.
can use all of these techniques.
Well, not quite. They're a little hampered now because of I don't think they'll get away in Ohio with what they did before. And you have a reasonably strong field of Democratic candidates. Oh, I think still that Al Gore is going to run. I mean, he was born to run for president. I'd be astounded if he didn't, but you know. But he has to answer. We had a piece on this, went to Common Dreams and a few other places. Al Gore still has to answer for what he did in 2001. You know, he made a big mistake after the 2000 election, not calling for a statewide recount. And he only counted for 4 counties. Well, you know, the state law said you were limited to 4 counties. That law should have been challenged. And so, you know, he doesn't have an excuse there, but the really inexcusable thing was gaveling down the Black Caucus. You know, the way the law works, as I'm sure most of you know, when the Electoral College convenes to elect a new president, the 2 houses of Congress meet in joint session, and if 1 senator and 1 representative sign a petition, then the 2 houses break into a 2-hour meeting each, and they, you know, take a vote and decide whether to allow the seating of this electoral delegation. This came out, it was passed in 1887, it came out of the stolen election of 1876, which was definitely no theory there. So in 2001, in January, when the Congress came together, the Black Caucus was livid. And, you know, we saw it in Fahrenheit 9/11, which to me is the most powerful piece of the movie. And there you have Al Gore up there gaveling them down. And I was told, Paul Wellstone was a friend of mine, and I was told by his staff that Gore told him that if he joined in the challenge, that Gore would not recognize him from his Hillary Clinton. Bob was schlepped around to Congress by Jesse Jackson, who's done great work on this, by the way. Jesse Jackson and John Conyers, you know, and then Bobby Kennedy. My joke is that Bobby Kennedy is the first white guy to really understand this, but you know, Jesse Jackson and John Conyers understood it immediately. And so Jesse went around the Senate and took Bob with him, and whenever he'd say, well, this and this happened, and he'd turn Bob on because Bob could recite all the numbers. And Bob asked Hillary Clinton directly, why didn't she stand up to join the Black Caucus in 2001? She had just been elected. And she told Bob that literally that Al Gore begged her not to do it.
Why?
If you can ask Al Gore or talk to his mother or his shrink, Tipper maybe knows, I have no idea. I can't explain it. It's the ugliest moment in the history of the Democratic Party outside of the Ku Klux Klan.
What's the role of consultants in all this?
You can't blame it on them ultimately. I mean, Bob Shrum, you know, who loses every election he consults on, you know, apparently didn't want a challenge. They wanted to preserve their credibility. I mean, come on. Yes.
Has anybody asked Al Gore why he did that?
Maybe, but I've never heard of it.
I've never seen it in print.
It's one of the things I dream about doing, you know. Mr. Gore, we love your stuff, Uncle Warren, but...
If he played saxophone, we could invite him to a concert and then sneak him in the dressing room and you'd be there waiting.
Yeah, there you go. And we lock him down. So yeah, I'd love to know. I'd love to ask him, but, you know...
Has there been any headway as far as getting computerized states to go back to paper ballots?
Yeah, I think here, actually. Well, there's a huge fight, which, you know, we could spend the rest of the night on. I don't want to, really, on this bill that was proposed by Rush Holt, who should change his first name, but who, you know, introduced a voter reform bill, which included an allowance for electronic machines, and that's divided the movement because many people don't want any electronic machines at all. The bill originally contained a very powerful provision demanding transparency of the computer code on all machines, but of course the owners of the machines claim proprietary rights. And now the bill has been changed. It passed the House, I believe, and has been changed, and they've stripped out the transparency. And now in order to look at the code on an electronic voting machine, you have to be specially approved, and you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I mean, come on, you know, it's perfect bait and switch. And so we're very concerned about this. Yes?
Where was the press in Ohio?
We were the press.
You were the press.
You know, it's astounding. You know, Norman and I have been journalists since before we were born, or before you were born. And, you know, to this day, no major media team has come in and done a comprehensive look at what happened in Ohio in 2004.
Why do you think that?
They're cowards,
They might
and
tell the truth.
and there's no money in it, you know. Right? I mean, You know, this is a shocking indictment of our profession. And I won't, you know, whatever the case, if it had not been for Bob and I having a website, you know, the irony is we were writing for an alternative paper. We had columns and they fired us about a year before the election because they wanted to have more coverage of the bar scene in Columbus. I totally agree. So as a result of that, we focused our efforts on our website, and we had built 4,000 visitors a day on the freepress.org website. And we broke the story 8 months before the election that it was about to be stolen because the owner of Diebold had circulated a letter saying he was going to deliver, you know, the great Wally Odell and Diebold. And so we had that at the Mother Jones website. And then a week before the election, we wrote a piece, 12 Ways Bush is Already Stealing the Election. And we talked about the removal of people from the voter rolls and the stuff with the weight of the paper on the registration forms and all this stuff. And our website visits went from 3,000 to 5,000 a day to more than 50,000 a day. And for the next 6 months, Bob and I were writing these pieces, and that was the coverage. Now, it was because we were in Ohio, and there was nobody else. And when Kerry conceded, the entire press corps left Ohio, except obviously we lived there. And so there was nobody else. And what reportage was done, and the left press really attacked us. We were attacked in Mother Jones, The Village Voice, TomPaine.com, The Nation, Thomas. They always put us down. I think it was because we're from Ohio. I mean, what can people from Ohio know? But, you know, nobody actually came to Ohio. One reporter came for like 8 hours, talked to some total stooge in the Democratic Party, and left having proven that the election wasn't stolen. You know, so we're the only, maybe nobody ever wants to come to Ohio, maybe that's it, but we have yet to have no media in the state, and no national media has come to Ohio to do this. Now, the media did go into Florida and do a recount, and they found that Gore won. All the headlines on the story said recount shows that Bush won, but if you read the story, it said that Gore won. You know, but in Ohio they didn't even bother to do that. So I don't mean to be pessimistic. In fact, I'm quite optimistic. We got a lot of email after the 2006 election thanking us for saving the country. Too bad you can't frame emails, you know. But maybe they were framed. But you know, so you don't think you can't have an impact. It's a very different situation now than it was leading into the 2004 election. I don't think the same thing can happen again, frankly. I really don't.
You mentioned earlier that Robert Kennedy's the only white guy who kind of gets this whole thing with what happened with the Black Caucus, and I was under the impression that last summer he started a lawsuit.
Yes, he did.
What has happened with that?
Nothing. It's very hard to get through. You know, we were lucky, so lucky in Ohio. You know, I think 12 federal circuit judges. We hit the one who would give us, you know, the time of day, and he's been fantastic. But if we'd have hit one of the other 11, it would have been nowhere. I don't think he's been able to get any traction in his lawsuits. He's a very good guy, Bobby Kennedy, by the way. Yes?
What is happening with your lawsuit, and what do you want to come out of this? I mean, is there anything that could come out of this?
Yes, we filed a consent decree with the Secretary of State. You know, we're suing Jennifer Brunner by accident, but we're suing her. And she has to come up with something that will be... Now, you know, she's already running with a bunch of our stuff, which is great. But we want to reform, you know, the electoral process. We want paper ballots. We want automatic voter registration for 18-year-olds. We want a bunch of stuff. And those are the two primary deals we want. And no removal of anybody. You know, we should habeas corpus. They should bring in the corpse before they can remove the, you know, the habeas there. So that's basically what we're looking for. So anyway, we have made a change. And we have significantly altered the electoral system, and I think the Democrats have Congress for, you know, why don't they use it? It's like Lincoln said to McClellan, you know, you have a wonderful army there, use it. You know, the Democrats just keep rolling over, and it's frustrating. But the country is definitely better now for what the grassroots electoral movement has done and election protection. And you know, Bob and I have been privileged enough to be the writers, along with Greg Palast, who's very good, Mark Crispin Miller, a wonderful woman, Bev Harris. It's really the godmother of this movement. You know, almost single-handedly brought these issues to our attention. And Steve Friedman and a few others. But it's remarkable, even on the left, how few people will deal with this issue. People just don't want to hear about it. It's more than they can handle, I think. But the reality is that election was stolen, and 2000 election was stolen.
Harvey,
No doubt about it.
You're so knowledgeable on this issue. I mean, how are you getting your message out to people other than in your book and media?
Well, this is it. But I will tell you that the one thing, and I say this without hesitation, that if there's anything left of American democracy, it's because of the internet. You know, and I credit Al Gore for saying this. You know, it's absolutely true. The mainstream media is so, of course, Gore signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which killed put the final death, the nail through the whatever heart the media had. And it did have a heart, actually, and they destroyed it. But along with the fairness doctrine going out under Reagan, we're hanging on by a fingernail, and the fingernail is in the internet. I think, Norma, you probably agree with me. It's the only way to get the word out, and it's incredibly effective. It really does work. So, you know, that's what we're hanging on to.
So are you having a bad hair day? Would you mind taking off your hat?
Sure. I mean, I won't mind, unless people faint.
It's getting dark in here.
Okay. Any other questions on the elections? Yes, please.
So the paper trail, I mean, with the electronic machines, it's just not effective to have that.
It's not reliable. Paper trail with the electronic voting machines is window dressing. It's not usable. It's not feasible. There's so many ways you can screw it up. You know, for example, printers somehow miraculously fail on election day. You know, and they get a receipt the size of something from the co-op. I mean, you know, it's not workable. And Avi's been doing a lot of work on this, and other, you know, it's just got to have paper ballots. And Bob had the great idea. We have a national holiday on Memorial Day, and everybody votes. You know, it's a 3-day weekend. You vote through the weekend, and then the kids get a day off from school, and then you have high school students count the ballots. And that's the way it should be. Okay. So, yes.
One more question about elections, and I know you want to move on to Solartopia.
Please.
We just got back from covering the elections in the Philippines.
I'm glad you got back.
And their panacea among the entire intelligentsia is that the way we got to fix the corruption and, you know, balls ups in our election is to go automated. It's just to go electronic. So
exactly the wrong direction.
If you were going to talk to the Filipino people, what would you say to them about this?
Well, I'd first compliment on their satay and other great stuff, and then I'd say, you know, you can't do it. You cannot have you cannot run public elections on privately owned machines.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and even publicly owned machines are suspect. But Jesse Jackson had the perfect line: you can't have public elections on privately owned machines, and there's no reason to have machines anyway. We can count these ballots, you know. Now, I've had some students that I would wonder about, but you know, the ballots should be counted. They should be counted by students, and that's the way it should be done. And the electronic is a dead end. The scantrons are semi-acceptable if you have to do that, but they have to be carefully monitored, and you know, it's a fairly simple technology, and at least you do have. It's a quicker way of counting paper ballots, you know. But there have to be tremendous checks and balances on that. But casting a vote directly on an electronic machine is suicidal. It's just not going to work.
Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia, Solartopia, Solartopia. Don't you know we're gonna have a Solartopia all over God's green world. Okay.